Hello YouTube, my name is Daniel and welcome to another edition of Education 180. You may be wondering why I'm sitting here making this YouTube video for you. Well, here's the deal. Today we'll be talking about the 9th section on the logical reasoning module on applying the principle. You may be wondering what applying the principle is. Well, essentially, when you come across a question on the logical reasoning section on applying the principle, you're going to be looking for an answer choice that follows the general rule stated in the passage. We are going to be looking at two types of apply the principle questions in this video. The first one will be the specific principle scenario, and the second will be the general principle scenario. Please take a moment to read through the following common question stems. Press pause, and when you are ready to continue, press play. We will continue. As stated before, there are two question types when answering apply the principle questions. The first one is specific. The description of a specific situation expressed in the argument that meets the conditions of some general principle. You must find the answer choice that contains a general principle that applies to the specific situation. Match the action or example with the tenets of the principle. The second type is a general. The expression of a general principle in the argument. You must find the answer choice that contains a specific situation that will satisfy the conditions of the principle. Match the tenets of the principle with the action or example. And as always, remember to eliminate incorrect answer choices and identify the correct answer. Eliminate answer choices that contain extraneous information. Look for the answer choice that expresses the key concept in meaningful terms. Please take a moment to read through Principle Sample Question 1. Press pause, and when you are ready to continue, press play. We will continue. Let's take a look at the following question together. It reads as follows. The government pays for individual medical needs through Medicare, but requires all citizens to pay for this service as taxpayers. Since it is the individuals who seek medical attention that primarily benefit from this paid medical care, the government should take steps to ensure individuals who seek medical care bear the cost, and thus should impose an end-user fee on medical care. So let's break it down as follows. The first part, the government pays for individual medical needs through Medicare. So we have the government right here. And they give dollars to support Medicare. But requires all citizens to pay for this service as taxpayers. So this part will be in blue. So here are our Angry Birds taxpayers. So in other words, so far, here are our individuals. And what it is saying that the government pays for individual needs, individual medical needs through Medicare, but requires all citizens or the taxpayers to pay for this service. And the second part, since it is the individuals who seek medical attention that primarily benefit from this paid medical care, So let's underline individuals. The government should take steps to ensure that individuals who seek medical care bear the cost. We'll do this in black. Should bear the cost, and this should impose an end user fee on medical care. So the second part is saying that individuals rather than everyone. Rather than everyone should pay for the service, since if it's only a certain group of people that are using this service in the first place, the argument is that these people alone should pay for the service that they use for, whereas the other people who don't use this service should not have to bear the cost. So when coming to a general principle, defining a general principle for this passage, we can come to the general conclusion here. Those who use Medicare should pay for it out of their own pocket. Those who are not using Medicare should not have to pay for it. That we can conclude as a general principle of the passage. So now this will help us when we're trying to look for an appropriate answer choice in the passage. We will come back to C in the section, but in a second, but C is a credited response. So let's read the last part of the question, which is right here. Which one of the following principles, if established, would do most to justify the conclusion of the argument on the basis of the reasons offered in its support? So that if you recall, the conclusion is that individuals should have to bear the cost, and this should impose an end user fee on Medicare. So the people who are using it should have to pay the fee rather than those who are not using the system. So let's take a look at A together. A says the government should avoid any actions that might alter the behavior of taxpayers. So if we look at this question, we can determine that it doesn't respond to the main argument of users paying for the services that they use. So this answer could be said to be extraneous. It's not helping us answer the question. Let's take a look at B. B says any rational system of healthcare must base the amount of cost and the amount of usage involved. So the principle established is not concerned about the amount of usage, but rather who is using the service. So B is incorrect. Let's cross out A and let's cross out B. Let's take a look at C, shall we? The people who stand to benefit from a government service should always be made to bear the cost of that service. Now this aligns with our principle that we established before. If we go back to C, this is the only statement that really speaks to our principle that those who use a service should pay for it, and the other people who don't use it shouldn't have to pay for it. So C is our credited response. So we'll circle that, and we've got our check mark over here. Just for argument's sake, let's take a look at D. And let's move this out of the way here. D says, government-based medical care for individuals should only be provided when it does not reduce incentive for individuals to seek medical care. So again, the principle wasn't concerned with incentives about seeking medical care. I don't even recall it being mentioned at all in the passage about incentives. So remember, when you're answering these type of questions, stick with what's in the passage. This was not in the passage, so we get rid of D. And I'm just going to move it up so we can read E. The choice of not accepting an offered service should always be available, even if there is no charge for the service. So again, the principle wasn't concerned with the choice to refuse an offered service. So this is also extraneous, and we can get rid of E. The principal was concerned with who should pay for the services, those who use it or everybody. So just to recap, C was the correct response. Let's try another one, shall we? Please take a moment to read through Principal Sample Question 2. Press pause, and when you're ready to continue, press play. We will continue. So let's read through the following question together. It reads as follows. Many moralists have urged moral awareness on the public at large, saying that if we accept moral responsibility for our actions, but then behaviors that directly or indirectly harm the morals of community ought to be avoided. Unfortunately, it is usually impossible for individuals to assess the moral impact of an individual action, and thus impossible for them to consciously restrict themselves to morally benign behavior. Because of this impossibility, there can be no moral duty to act in the way moralists urge, since, and then we are to conclude the ending of this passage. So let's break it down as follows. So the first part, many moralists have urged moral awareness. So let's highlight that in green. Let's pick out the key points. Moralists urge moral awareness on the public at large. And thus we have here, we've got a group of moralists, and they're urging moral awareness on the public at large, saying that if we accept a moral responsibility for actions, then behaviors that indirectly harm the morals of community ought to be avoided. In other words, we should be avoiding harmful behavior. Or not necessarily harmful, but immoral behavior. Behaviors that harm the morals of the community ought to be avoided. And I just wrote to summarize, we should be avoiding immoral behavior. The second part, unfortunately, it is usually impossible for individuals to assess the moral impact of an individual action. So that's represented by this picture down here. All right, unable to assess. Actions. And thus impossible for them to consciously restrict themselves to morally benign behavior. So it's hard for us to determine what actions are moral. Because of this impossibility, there can be no moral duty to act the way moralists urge. So, in other words, it's hard for us to act the way the moralists want us to. And it is here where we need to come to some sort of conclusion. And I would say that it's hard for us to act the way that moralists want us to, because we can't assess our actions in the first place. And we can come up with a general principle before we answer the question right here. So the basic principle is asking, how can we expect people to have a moral duty to act in a certain way when they have no way of assessing the moral impact of their individual actions? So the accredited response is E, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Let's take a look at the question. Okay, let's start with A, which is right here. A, but before we do A, let's read the last part of the question. Which one of the following principles provides the most appropriate completion for the argument? So A reads as follows. Our moral duty not to perform an action is never based solely on the effects the action will have on other people. So again, the principle is not concerned about the effects of action on other people, but whether they are capable of following through with moral duty. So A is incorrect. We can get rid of that one. B says moral considerations should not be the sole determinants of what actions are considered acceptable for individuals. So again, the principle, it's always important to come back to the principle, which was back here, about whether we're able to assess the moral implications of our actions. So the principle is not concerned with what actions are acceptable, but rather what they are capable of, but rather whether they are capable of moral actions in the first place. So again, the key idea here was whether actions are acceptable or not, but we're concerned with whether we're capable of moral actions in the first place. So B can be eliminated. C says the morally right action is always one whose effects produce the least total harm. So again, the passage did not address how much harm is needed for an action to be considered moral or immoral. So C is also incorrect, and we can get rid of C. I'm just going to take a second to move D up so we can read it. Alright, and D says, where a moral duty exists, it supersedes any other legal duty and any other kind of duty. So, in reading the passage, I don't even recall legal duty being mentioned. So, this answer choice is extraneous. Because remember, just stick with what happened in the passage. So let's get rid of D. And the last person says, or the last answer choice says, a person cannot possibly have a moral duty to do what he or she is unable to do. And this is our correct answer choice. As you recall, we said previously that the basic principle is asking how can we expect people to have a moral duty when we're unable to assess the moral impact of our actions in the first place. So E is the only statement that speaks to this principle, and E is our correct response. So just to summarize, E was the final correct response for principal sample question 2. Once again, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like us on YouTube, and on behalf of Education 180, happy LSAT writing.